Hey guys, it's Ronald Griffin here for artificialanimation.com, and in this tutorial we'll be using After Effects and Trapcode Particular to create some snow that'll hopefully look a bit like this. Alright, so from that example you can see we have a nice tracked scene with the Foundry's camera tracker, and then we've gone ahead and added some particles in that looks like pretty decent snow using Trapcode Particular. If you don't know what Trapcode Particular is, it's a plugin for After Effects, and it adds particles. You've got an auxiliary system, you've got physics, air, basically a lot of great stuff that'll make any motion graphic production really just a lot better. If you plan on using particles, I can't stress how much Trapcode Particular has really helped me out in the past. Using the built-in plugin tools it just hits a limit at a certain point, and I think that's the time to invest in something like this. But if you look on the Red Giant Software website and you find Trapcode Particular, you'll notice in the included presets that there's some presets, Snowy Night 1 for example, and Snowy Night 2. We won't be using these presets for this tutorial, but I do recommend checking out some of these presets because they can help you in understanding sort of how the actual particular system works, because it's not something easy to just jump straight into. It takes a bit of practice, but it's not hard to learn at all. So in the demo you can see we have some really fast flying snow, and the reason for this is some people, you know, for different scenes you need some slow snow, you need some very nice calm snow, but in this scene I wanted this sort of intense feeling, and this is just something I shot quickly with my camera, and you can see we've got a bit of sort of smoke blowing in the background with the particles, and we've just got a sporadic movement of these particles. So with that in mind, we're going to be creating some pretty violent particles, not some calm ones, but I will teach you sort of the general idea around the particles and how you can achieve different effects with this. So if this is something you're into, then I suggest you keep watching. This is actually suggested by someone in the comment section for an Element 3D video I uploaded just last week, and he asked me if I could create a tutorial on creating some snow using Particular. Now here's the tutorial in response to that, so I hope you especially enjoy. Now I have a scene here set up. It's tracked, like I said, with the Foundry's camera tracker, and this is not something you have to do. This is just so I could show you how to apply this to a real-life working example. And when I say it's motion tracked, I mean we have a camera here, and the camera is in 3D space, and we have these two nulls here. We've got this one in the background, and we've got this one in the foreground, and they're tracked perfectly. So we have a 3D scene set up. So if you don't have this, it's no problem at all. You can continue in just, you know, using the black background. It doesn't matter. It's the same principles, and hopefully you'll learn how to apply it to whatever you need to apply it to this way, rather than if I just showed you without using it in 3D space. So the first thing we're going to do is go to Layer, New Solid. We'll call this Solid Particular. Make sure it's comp size and click OK, and then we'll go to Effect, Trapcode Particular. And now some immediate changes we're going to do is we'll be using the emitter and particle tab the most, so we're just going to leave these twirled down. Now you'll notice that if you do this, you'll see particles, sort of just like this. You'll see these particles in the middle of the screen. The reason I don't see these particles is because I have a camera. So if I switch this camera off, you can see I see them. If I switch them on, they're gone. Why is this? Well, it's because the Z space is completely different. If you see here, at the end of the video, I see some white here. That's actually a particle. What I'll go ahead and do is I'll take the position Z, which you don't need to do if you don't have this problem. But the Z position, it controls where in Z space your particle layer is. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 2500. And here you can see I have my particles. They are now right there in front of me, and I can see, if I watch this, I can see that they're sticking to that one spot in the scene, regardless of where my camera is moving. So some immediate changes we're going to have to do is we're going to have to change the emitter type to a box and the direction to directional. This is because obviously we want our particles to be falling, we want them to be traveling in a direction, and we want to be controlling how wide and where the particles fill. So some changes I'm going to do to the X rotation and the Y rotation. For the X rotation, we'll type in 90, so that's 90 degrees, and the Y rotation 180, so that's 180 degrees, and that means our particles will be falling. So again, if I just solo the particular layer, this is how you'll be working, unless you're applying it to something. You can see that our particles are falling. For the purpose of this tutorial, I'll just be working like this until it's time to sort of stick it together with our scene. So no worries if you haven't got the footage, no worries if you haven't got a tracked scene, nothing like that. We can just, it's the same concept. So we're going to start changing settings straight away. The emitter size X, Y, and Z. It's important to change these so that we fill our scene. Now the size X, I'm just going to make 3000. Size Y, again 3000. And for Z, I'll make it 1200. And that's pretty good. Now what I'm going to start doing is we'll start messing with the particle life and the particles a second. So the particles per second, this is basically how many particles per second gets generated. I'm going to change this to 300. So we have a bit more, and the life is kind of important because it dictates how long our particle will be alive for. If we watch this now, you can see they're just sort of flicking on and they're flicking off. I'm going to change the life to 20 seconds. And down here in the particle type, I'm going to change it to a cloudlet, and that's just going to change the look of it. You can see here, it looks just sort of like a miniature cloud. Now, in the emission extras twirl down under emitter, we can change the pre-run, because if you notice here at frame 0, we have no particles and they sort of just flicker on. We don't want that at all. We're going to change the pre-run to 100. That means that it's already done 100 frames of animation, so we already have our particles here. And as you can see at the top here, we've sort of got this black empty space. So what we can do is we can grab the center point here, we can just drag it up, and you can do that accordingly to just fill the scene. So there we have a bunch of particles, and now we're going to go ahead and start making some changes to physics. Now you've got this velocity here, and the velocity can be left alone or you can change it, but it basically dictates how fast your particles will travel. So you can see if I have that at a ridiculously high value, you'll see they're falling very quickly. That can be quite useful, especially for controlling the movement speed of snow, but we won't be focusing too much on that right now. So under the particle tab, we're going to change a few things. We're going to go ahead and put the size to 1, and then here where it says opacity over life, we're going to basically create a ramp, because you can see, as I said, they come on very harsh and then they go away. It's sort of like immediate. We want it to be smooth. You can either just click this little preset here, which makes it smooth automatically, or you can draw it yourself, which is very creative. You can just sort of just draw out your ramp, which you can have hours of fun doing this. I mean, this is amazing technology right here. Anyway, that looks okay. It's not a big deal. So we want some random in this. It looks way too linear. Everything's the same, and as you should know by now, nothing is the same in real life. White is never white, black is never black. So size random, I'll put this to something like 80. Now we have a bit of random size going on, and we can also go ahead and change the opacity to around 60. That just means it's not as strong. Now you can notice our particles are pretty small, but we'll be changing this accordingly. You don't have to have these particles as small. They can be a lot bigger. You know, this is completely up to you. If I change the position Z, you can see if I move them closer, they immediately become bigger. But because I've got this 3D scene set up, this is a must for me. I have to have them smaller because when I switch the camera back on, you can see they are closer. So I'm just compensating for that right now. So we'll go back to how we were, and we'll continue with the settings. So let's talk about physics for a second. Particular has a great physics engine. It's two models. You've got air and you've got bounce. Bounce is to bounce off a surface, but obviously we don't have a floor to bounce off of, so we don't need that. So we'll just stick with air. And the gravity, this is pretty important because this dictates how fast they fall. I'm going to put this to 180. and you can see straight away we basically can't see any particles. That is because they're falling pretty quickly. I'll just go ahead and drag the up so we get a few more. And just to make it easier to see, we're gonna push this toward the camera. Alright, so we just got some falling particles now. It's not bad. It's not bad. So we're gonna have to tweak the wind because we want a lot of random going on. We want to really just seem like it's really violent and there's a lot of wind going on. So under air, we control that down. Motion path, you really don't need to mess with that. You can actually have a different selection of motion paths, but we don't need that for this. We need to be focusing on the wind. Now, the wind X basically just dictates if the wind is coming from the right or left. So, you know, whatever direction you want the wind to come from, this is for you. I want it to be coming from right to left, so the wind in real life would be coming from the northerly direction. So I'm going to change this to around minus 1,600, just for the sake of giving a value. And you can see that the particles, they stop right here. Now you can either move this this little handle around to fix that, or in some cases, if it completely stops here, you're going to have to change the emitter box, the emitter size. So if we stretch this out, you can see we start getting particles again. This is all relative of how big your scene is. So tweak that as necessary. Just keep in mind that, you know, if you don't have any particles anymore, you're going to have to change the size of the emitter and everything like that. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. Anyway, back to what we were doing. We were changing the wind. So while we're on the subject of wind, we've decided that it's coming from right to left. Another thing I want to do is push it down just slightly. So the wind Y is going to push it up and down. I'm just going to put in 180 for wind Y. And wind Z, that's going to push it forward, so basically towards the camera or away from the camera. I'm just going to type 140 here for that value. Not a lot of change. Again, we can barely see it, so I apologize for that, but if we, just for the purpose of this tutorial, I don't want people to have invisible particles, so I'll just change the size and everything so you can see it properly. Alright, so we've got some particles. They're falling from the right down to the left, and they look pretty good. I mean, it's not bad, right, for a start. So if we actually, I'm just going to tweak this so we have particles that fill our frame at all times. Let's change the emitter size out. Okay, we're looking good. Now let's continue with the physics. So right now we've just got them falling pretty linearly, and we want some more random to their movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some spin. We can do that down in the air. Spin amplitude maybe 40. So now they're they are spinning. There's some random going on. Air resistance, you can play around with that. The spin frequency, you can dictate how frequently they spin around. Now, what's really interesting is the turbulence field. And if we scroll that down, the effect size, let's put that to 25. And the effect position, we can change that to 450. What we get then is, if we play this back, we get the particles. They are moving a bit randomly. They're popping around. So that's what we want. And you can mess with the complexity and change that to 7. The octave scale. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can change in here. And again, you can play around with this and achieve the effect you want. That's what I urge you to do. All right, so our particles are looking pretty good. Now, as you can notice in the original example, we have a lot of motion blur going on. This is very important. This scene was shot at 1/60th of a shutter speed, and that means that if we look here, for example, we have this scene. We can make out the details of the building pretty well in this scene, but on another frame, it's all blurry, and that's the shutter speed. As the camera moves, you get less light and less picture of each frame, and it merges them together and it creates blur. And that's nice for our eyes because it just creates a cinematic effect. So you can see here the particles are popping around and they're blurry. So go back into our particular layer, and down at the bottom, where it says rendering, we can drop that down. We can drop down motion blur. For this specific layer, we could do it with the comp. So with a comp, you simply have this the global motion blur switch on, and then you hit that, and then we've got motion blur. Ta-da! But for this specific one, I want some more detailed motion blur. I want to be able to control the motion blur. So motion blur, we're going to set this to on. And then the shutter angle, you can see immediately we've got some interesting effect. We can change the shutter angle to 163. This is just the value I used before. And the shutter phase, around 90. And now we have that effect we were looking for. We've got sporadic, random particles that have motion blur. And to me, this is pretty good because we've got some that are stronger, some that are not as strong. There's a lot of random stuff going on, and it looks pretty good to me. So at this point, we can start to see where this is going. It's going pretty good. So we can go ahead and duplicate this layer now. The reason I'm going to do this is, you'll see this in a second. For the next layer, I'm going to switch the motion blur completely off. And now we've got these two layers, and you can see that right now we've got a problem because they're exactly the same. So what we need to do is we need to move this, we need to offset this particular layer, the one we duplicated, just so it's completely random. And we'll just stretch it out to fill the frame. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll change the motion blur to comp setting, and we'll just hit the motion blur switch for this. And now we've got some pieces that have less motion blur, and some pieces that have a lot of motion blur. So this is a way we're going to make it a bit more random. And now another thing, I'm not sure if you noticed, but we have a bit of fog flying around with these particles, and that was simply done using a fractal field, which I'll do in a second. So right now I'm just going to composite these two layers into my original footage, and this is just a step I'm going to take. Like I said, if you don't have that footage there, don't worry about it. It's not really of your concern at this point. You can pre-render this and use it just as stock footage. You can do whatever you want with it. Now what I've got here is I've got a track matte that basically masks out the windows. And how you can create this track matte is simply by keyframing the mask path here. Just rotoscoping basically. So what I'll do is, for this particular layer, I'm going to go ahead and switch the alpha matte on, and then I'm going to duplicate this. I'll do the same for this, alpha matte on. And now we've got the windows masked out, so inside we obviously wouldn't have snow. And this is how we've achieved this effect, just by rotoscoping. You can see here the rotoscope isn't perfect, but it's simply for tutorial purposes. You can see a bit of sort of snow bleeding on that window frame, but it looks okay. So at this point, we're going to create that fractal field I was talking about. And now to do this, we're going to go Layer, New, Solid, just we'll name this Noise, and we'll click OK. We will search for fractal, and we'll grab fractal noise, and we'll drag it onto the noise layer. And I'm just going to immediately put up the contrast. So now we've got some contrast there. It's going to help us with the final result. And I want to animate this, so I'm going to drop down the transform, draw down, hit the keyframe button for the offset turbulence. And so now if we hit U on the noise layer, we've got the first keyframe here at frame 0. And I'm just going to move forward. And then I'm going to take this value and I'm going to move it. So minus 5,000. And so what we've done now is, you can see we've got this, if we solo this, we've basically got this noise layer moving from right to left. And what we can do is, if we play around with some of the settings a bit more, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe the complexity. So again, hit the keyframe, go to the end, and just going to drop it down a bit. So now if we just look at this, it's just basically a layer that changes a bit. It's a bit random. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that, drop it down below our particular layers. Going to grab one of these track mattes again, and going to invert. Whoops, it's not what I wanted to do. There we go. And now, obviously this isn't looking too pretty, but if we change the transfer mode to screen, and then we hit T for opacity, and we just drop the opacity to something around 4, very low value. We don't want this too strong, we just want a very subtle effect. And now, if we just ram preview, we can see that we've got some pretty sporadic snow going about, and we've got this sort of mist layer moving in the background, and we'd probably want to drop the opacity even more down to 2. We just want that really subtle. So that's pretty much how I've gone about creating this original example. There's using the same values and everything, but what's important to remember, and what I want you to really learn from this tutorial, is that with these settings, I want you to create something completely different. I don't want you just to copy the values. I want you to create your own particle system. I want you to make your own snow that looks 10 times better than this. You've got the technique, you've got the basics on how to do it, and you can create so much more and such a better result than this. This is just purely a tutorial result. I'm sure you can figure out 1,000 uses and 1,000 better ways to apply this. But this has been just the basic gist of how to set up the snow in particular. I hope you learned something. I hope it's been useful for you. And I really hope that the fact that I used footage here in 3D space didn't make it too bad for you. I hope you still got the same quality out of the tutorial. But if you have any questions whatsoever, you can go ahead and leave them in the comment section. You can shoot me an email, or you can send me a message on YouTube, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you and help you out. So I'm Ronald Griffin for Artificial Animation, and I will see you next Monday. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, like, comment, and rate the video.